Good afternoon, and welcome to the September 6th Special Council Advisory Council meeting in the order of acting as a planning advisory committee. This meeting is called to order, and this special meeting of council is designated as a council advisory meeting in support of planning requests. For members of council, you may ask questions of our planners as required, or any one of our staff members that is here. And these matters were first introduced to council through a special meeting on January 22nd, 2024. We have had a lunch and learn facilitated by C&D Planning on May the 6th, 2024. We had a special meeting on July 25th of 2024, and we have also held public participation meetings in support of both requests held on August the 29th, 2024 and September 3rd, 2024. Additionally, our planner is here to provide support. So it should be noted that there was also a lunch and learn planned for July 31st with C&D Planning. However, it was canceled at the request of members of council since there was no new information for the presentation. I will note that we have quorum. There are two agenda items: the Kentville Crossing MPS LUB amendment of land designation and rezoning recommendation for first reading, and COGS LUB amendment rezoning R3 to R4 recommendation for first reading. CAO, do we have any further changes to this agenda?
No, Your Worship, we don't.
Thank you. So I would take a motion to accept the proposed agenda, please. Deputy Mayor for the motion and Councillor Huntley for the second. Thank you. All those in favor of accepting the proposed agenda? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. So our first order of business is a request from Brighter Communities on behalf of the developer Mitch Bryson to develop the Kentville Crossing on PID 555-1774. The request is to amend the generalized future land use map and LUB to residential from industrial to encourage diverse housing developments. The request is supported by C&D Planning report to council and further detailed in the public participation document and additional recommendations from the planner. Caroline, did you wish to provide any further details to council on this matter? I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but just giving you an opportunity to provide anything further.
So I didn't prepare a presentation, but I am available for questions. The reports that you see in front of you are, you've received public participation program reports for both of the applications. And basically what this is a supporting document that outlines exactly what as you've done as an advisory committee to hear from the public on the application that is under consideration. There's also a secondary recommendation document that I've included for the Bryson development application. This is a recommendation I am making based on what we heard from the public. There was significant concern about stormwater management in the area, concern just about the lot in general with having it not be developed at all. So for that reason, I felt it was appropriate to include the R3 zone in the R4 requirements for site plan approval for units over 6. For developments with units over 6. The justification for this is just to align the policies, but also because we added that additional R3 piece as a secondary request from the applicant later on in the process. So the R3 zone really wasn't considered as significantly as we looked at the R4 and R5 zones. So that's why I'm making this additional recommendation. And I'm happy to answer questions if
All right,
council has them.
thank you very much, Caroline, for that. And so we'll put the motion on the table and then begin any discussion. And for members of council, we are acting in committee, so our staff is here as a resource, and no issue with asking for further information. So the motion would be that CAC recommend first reading to council to approve the application to change the future designation of PID 555-1774 from industrial to residential zoning at the September 9th special meeting of council. Further, to rezone the area marked Phase 1 on the map of the planner's report to a mixture of R3 and R4, and the Phase 2 remainder to high-density R5 residential. And further, amend the MPS and make necessary policy changes as outlined in both the planner's report and the additional recommendation from the public participation meeting document labeled Additional Recommendations, and further schedule a public hearing on September 25th, 2024. Someone could move that, please. Councillor Huntley, thank you. And for the second? Councillor York, thank you. It has been moved and seconded that CAC recommend first reading to council to approve the application to change the future designation of PID 555-1774 from industrial to residential zoning at the September 9th special meeting of council. Further, to rezone the area marked Phase 1 on the map in the planner's report to a mixture of R3 and R4, and the Phase 2 remainder to high-density R5 residential. Further, amend the MPS and make necessary policy changes as outlined in both the planner's report and the additional recommendation from the public participation meeting document labeled Additional Recommendations. And further, schedule a public hearing on September 25th, 2024. The floor is now open for discussion. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. So the last part of the motion where it is, and it would be helpful if it was up on the screen.
I agree, it would be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't have the motion written down, so I'm not able to put it on the screen tonight.
Okay. Then I'll ask if you can repeat it, Mayor. The last part, it's a large motion.
It is.
I tried to jot some things down. Nothing is alarming except for the very last part where it is amend the MPS, make the necessary policy changes. So is that with respect, are we referring to?
So if you recall the recommendations from this document, Caroline had outlined the specific LUB paragraphs that were to be amended. And in the interest of, I'm going to say, keeping the motion on task as opposed to going into the level of details of the policy statements and that would be amended. And as well, there was the additional recommendation which Caroline expressed when she was up at the podium here with regards to in the R3, if any of the buildings were more than 6 units, that it had to be through site plan development.
Are you referring to page 3 of the C&D report where it says recommendation given the significant housing shortage?
No, there was another document called additional recommendations. It was its own separate document as part of the package that we were provided with. And so her actual recommendation, as it reads from the documents, it is recommended that the Council Advisory Committee consider recommending the application to Council for first reading as stated in the planner's report, along with the additional comments included in this recommendation. It was to address the public's concerns, staff believes it would be appropriate to include the R3 zoning in the proponent's application. This would require site plan approval for the construction of 6 or more units on the lot of medium-density R3 zone. This additional amendment would ensure consistency between the medium-density and the high-density zones.
I do have that typed
So I'll just sort of keep going here. So that's, so site plan approval for 6 or more. I think one of the items that was outlined, and this was actually a question I had, was can we go to first and second, and then rather than using site plan approvals, amend our MPS to reflect development agreements, which I understand will probably form part of a secondary plan when we get there, but are we able to do that when we go to first and second? And I'm a bit confused around the site plan approval, not necessarily for the R3 zone, but I know Caroline mentions in her reports different times about referring to DAs, and I just don't know if that's done simultaneously.
Yes, it is. So
Okay.
all of these things, as discussed back in January, are all part of these amendment and policy changes, including the use of development agreements when you're looking at different parcels of land and how they're going to be used.
But for the R3 zone, if any building exceeds 6 units, then she's recommending site plan approval as,
Yes.
sorry, and maybe I'm the only one confused. I
Okay.
hope I'm not.
Caroline, could you, rather than me mumbling through it, if
Anybody?
you could speak to that, please?
There's a bunch of amendments, and you're correct. If you look at the additional recommendation report that I provided, it shows the changes that were made to the R4 zone as well.
Okay.
And part of that is that if the developer is looking at multiple lots, looking at across multiple lots or a larger development, that they have the option to go through development agreement. I did not include that in the R3 zone because the R3 zone, this is going to come up in a bit, probably shortly, but the R3 zone typically only permits up to 8 units per lot, so the thought process behind that is that it would just be the larger developments within the R3 that would have to go through the site plan approval.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably have more, but I'll keep going.
All right. Is there any further, do you have something further?
No, not right now.
All right. Is there any further discussion on, Councillor Zabian?
Thank you, Mayor Snow, and thanks, Caroline. I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm sorry if I'm going to confuse you guys again. Just one clarity. When the lot's rezoned, if it's rezoned to R4, so any developer comes and they want to put in more than 6 units, or whatever the case may be, I guess my clarity is who decides whether it's a development agreement or site plan approval? That's what when I've read that, I'm trying to figure out who I guess who makes that call.
So if it's in the R5 zone, so that large holding zone, the only option is either to build one single-family home, a kennel, or they can go through development agreement. For the policy GD30, how we've written it is we've added section D, where multi-unit residential dwellings with 6 or more units on a single lot located within the medium-density R3 and high-density R4 zones. Developments must comply with the amenity requirements for multi-unit residential buildings and subdivisions parkland requirements where applicable. If the developer prefers R4 developments may proceed through a development agreement in place of a site plan approval. So the intention behind that, and it is clear as you move through the policies because it's written in different areas, but the intention behind that is if the developer's looking at a single property and a smaller scaled constructed building, something that's intended to be 6 units perhaps, or between 6 and 8 units, then that would go through a site plan approval. However, really R4, anything could go through it. So let me remove my reference to I don't want to confuse you. So my reference to 6 to 8 units, ignore that. Basically, if they're on a single lot, the developer can choose to do site plan approval. But if they're looking at a collection of lots, or if they're looking at a really large piece of land, it makes a from a developer's perspective, development agreements can be a little bit onersome. They do have some unknowns related to them because they do have to come to council for final approval. But it does offer the opportunity for more leniency and to engage with the planning team and council to make perhaps some exemptions where they may want to make changes within the development that doesn't necessarily fit exactly within the criteria. So, did I answer your question already?
Yeah, that was very helpful. So
Okay.
this is my question, and I asked this before, and perhaps I didn't phrase it properly. What do we have to do as a council in our policies that we're the ones deciding that we want development agreements? What do we have? Do we have anything in there that, because once we rezone it, our job is kind of done for the most part, and it's now back with staff, which is how it's been. But what do we have to put in there, or what do we have now that holds council responsible for this agreement?
If you would prefer a development agreement, you absolutely can take out the site plan approval element. We could rewrite the policy and make it only by development agreement for multi-unit dwellings in the R4 zone.
Okay.
That's within your authority.
Okay.
Part of the reason the policy is written the way it is because the developer was not as interested in a development agreement process. That being said, that is always an option to consider.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Your Worship. Caroline, and I don't know whether it's you or Dave or someone else that might, has a hydrologic study ever been done on that piece of land?
Not as far as I haven't heard anything or received anything, and I assume that would have been part of the application I received from staff.
I have a real problem with, I like the developments. I like the fact that we want to develop high density, but the water problems that the town's been having for the last 10 years, I don't understand with a big hill on the south side of us why we don't include in our MPS or LUB that hydrologic studies be done. I assume, and I don't know whether someone in here would know, but I assume that the Department of Environment has not done, because I know that developers have to go by Department of Environment criteria, and if they haven't done one, I don't understand how they can sit in Halifax or wherever they are and say, this is what you need to do, when nobody knows how much water is going to come down a hill when you remove all the tree, and it's steep. That particular piece of land, from what I saw from the topography, goes from 10 to 100 feet. I mean, that's a 90-foot drop. That's a lot of water if you take all those trees out.
Unfortunately, council doesn't have a lot of authority when it comes to controlling clearing of a lot. I've had councils try to do it in the past, particularly around watershed areas, because they were having issues with blue-green algae where people were clearing near lakes. And it's very difficult to enforce and put into policy. However, as a council, you do have policy IM2, which means that council may request any study they wish when considering a municipal planning strategy amendment. So if that was something that you felt more comfortable with requesting before moving forward, that is within your authority. I will note, though, that until you have a good understanding of what the actual development will look like, it's really kind of a useless document. The stormwater management portion of the requirement for the development, as he moves forward, mostly through site plan approval or development agreement, it will kick in, and there will be that requirement that there be a well done plan by a certified person, and it will be approved by your town engineer. It is within, I believe I also included this in the public kind of answers to the questions in the public participation program response, but it is within your authority to give criteria to the town engineer of what you would like to see in a stormwater management plan. So that is something that you can write right into your land use bylaw. You can write it right into a development agreement. So those are all things that you are able to consider.
Two things. I would think a hydrologic study would at least give you a baseline of how much water is going to come down the hill with full trees. But the second thing, the last thing you said, I assume that the criteria for these studies that come in when subdivisions and roads and stuff are done for these developments has been going on for a while. It's been commonplace for a decade, 2 decades, 30 years that these studies are done.
Yes, they're always required. However, they've progressed significantly, the requirements and what they look like and the kind of features that are part of them.
And that's why I think we should do everything we can, because they've been required for decades and we still have water issues. So I'm all for development, I'm all for this development, but I think we have to do our due diligence on a hydrologic study, and I love development agreements.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam, if it's
Go ahead.
just one other thing. Another thing that I've had advisory committees request as part of the process is to have a member, whoever represents their area from the province, as a staff for the Department of Environment, actually come in and explain their requirement process and how it works with development and how they would look at a specific site. That is something that we've done before as well, prior to moving to council. So that's another option. Lots of options for you to think about on how to proceed and what you think would be best.
Thank you.
Councillor York.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's a best practice for ratios between industrial, commercial, and residential for a town our size, either by population or, I guess, geography or geographic area. Mostly because there isn't a whole lot of industrial left. This is what it's zoned R5. It's not part of the industrial park, and I understand those boundaries are quite firm, but it is industrially zoned. And I'm wondering if there is a best practice for that ratio, or if there are ratio recommendations at all.
It's very difficult. There were years and years and years ago, but things have changed significantly in the planning community and how we approach things. A really simple example would be parking. Previously planners were very involved in parking, and like we had our parking requirements, we had the size and the space and the shape of it and it drawn out and exactly what it had to look like. And in the end, what we found was either you had a large developer that knows what they're doing, like Costco or Sobeys, that likes their parking spots a certain size because they have carts that go by them, or we had a small-scale developer who wanted to put something local in a local commercial use in a downtown, but couldn't meet the parking requirements based on the size ratios and that kind of thing. And in the end, you were actually hurting economic development by having parking requirements. So it's kind of the same example that how we plan has slowly changed. So we've been taught that it's important to have a good ratio between industrial, commercial, and residential land. Of course, it's important to have industrial land from an economic development perspective. There is opportunity for jobs there. It brings new funding and money into your community and circulates it. I'm sure Lindsay could get into why industrial land is very important as well. So we tried to do a literature review for council and stay neutral, and that is part of your report. I looked at all other similar towns because towns in general are much more dense and they often don't have as much industrial land as larger municipalities, just as a municipal unit. But I wasn't able to find any standard. What I found was that some have no industrial land and they've focused on other things like local commercial and housing, while others felt that industrial was really important and economic development was their priority, and they created, economic development committees, and they put tracts of land aside and really pushed to put in industrial development. So I think in the end of the day, it comes down to what council's hearing from constituents and taking the information in front of you, understanding that there is a housing crisis, and the town has been identified by the province as one of the areas that really requires housing, but also understanding that those people who live in the housing are going to need jobs. So it's a really difficult decision to make. I wish I had a simple answer.
That was helpful, though. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, I see you up, however, Councillor Maxwell has not spoken yet. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Two things that I'd like to have addressed. I do believe, and Mayor Snow probably has the information on this, that Kings County is putting in a business park off the 101. Is that correct? So there will be opportunity for industrial development in our area and jobs to come from that. Okay, so that was one thing I just wanted a point of clarification on. And the other thing is for our engineer, Director Bell, if I can talk to him for a second. I'm just wondering, Director Bell, you've seen this land and I'm sure you've been up on it. Do you have any issues with us at all being able to control stormwater in that area? If you could speak to it, I'd appreciate it.
I don't, and I should even back up to Councillor Gerard's question about studies or hydrogeologic studies, different names for similar things. Certainly, the developer's engineer has looked at this site very closely, and there's only a concept plan at this point in time. This is obviously just for rezoning. So at the rezone stage, they have it at least looked at. You've seen Crystal Fuller's sort of concept plan that shows the full potential build out of the site. And in that site, there's roughly 25% green space and no less, I think, than 3 stormwater management areas. So they certainly have looked at the slope and the coverage and the percentage of roads and versus lots and the type of density as the current concept sits. That's where it's at today, and as we're looking at 3 different pieces, an R4, an R3, and then a remainder R5 zone. So yes, there have certainly been studies done or preliminary plans. We won't receive those until you get into subdivision approval. You won't see those studies until after, if the rezoning is successful. That's when we would see stormwater management studies, hydrogeologic studies. They look at the soils, they look at the slopes, they look at the percentage of change from pre to post development, and it has to be balanced. And that is when it happens. You wouldn't look at it now if it's as it exists today in the M1 zone. The potential tomorrow, if someone decided to make that an industrial park or multi-unit industrial, not necessarily a park, but it could be a Costco. They could win there in clear cut and make that entire site a big box store with 95% hard surface and still have to manage the stormwater, but manage it in a much more intense way to make that net zero downstream. Councillor Maxwell, your question, I guess I was answering Councillor Gerard's, but yours was more, have I walked it, and is that?
And do you have any concerns about us being able to control the water there?
No, and we wouldn't be. It would be, the developer has to satisfy once a design is settled on. And again, this is at rezone. We're looking at a front portion of R4, a middle portion of R3, and the remainder R5. Yes, it is steep. It's actually probably more than 100 feet. It's probably closer to 100 meters, but that averages, like many Kentville sites on that side of Park Street, it's probably on average no less, certainly no more than 8% road grades, but there's some that are gonna be 2 and 3%, some are gonna be 7 and 8% road grades. Anything at an intersection is flatter, and that's where they would have to have stormwater management areas, green space, and going into the two main normal sort of ravine areas that one is on the east side of the property. It certainly starts, Mitchell Brook starts well south and east of this subject property, up beyond the unbuilt Hills Road. That's a major named watercourse. It finishes in on this property before it crosses Park Street. That's where there's two stormwater management areas proposed now, and the other one is the other smaller gorge that there's actually two more ones. One sort of goes through the middle of the property to the west of Andritz, Weevex, and then the other one farther west is sort of a natural divide between this property and the industrial zone behind Access Nova Scotia, and that stormwater area again would all have to be left natural around it, and ponds built as the water comes off the residential area. So no, I don't have any concerns, Councillor Maxwell.
And one more question. The stormwater management that we use, the regulations and so on, would be the most up-to-date
Provincial
right
and the standards that those designers have to use that are provincially regulated, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. And so if you could...
Stay?
Yeah. So I'm just going to cover off a few things in mind. Director Bell, one of the items that was brought up at the public participation meeting was around the well field, and I understand that we have seven wells, and I just would like you to talk a little bit about, I know there's the Zone B, the well capture, there's the Zone C, well field protection, the Zone Z, the well field recharge. Can you just give some context around the well fields and how having this residential will be more beneficial than having it as industrial land, please?
Certainly, we have 4 zones. A is at the wellhead itself, and there are some single wells that have like a 50-meter radius circle around the wellhead. We have some double wells that are in the sand and gravel and the bedrock aquifer in the same site. Those have a larger circle because they're 2 wells sort of very close to each other. Very, very restricted there, but all these wells are down either on the trail or at the north end of Mitchell Avenue before you get to the Harvest Moon Trail. So as you leave that restricted area, you go into the B zone. The B zone, again, is the shortest travel time to the well field. That would encompass most of the north side of Park Street, where Bonavista Estates is, and Baden Powell and those immediate subdivisions, all residential with the exception of a few car dealerships. Certainly those car dealerships, they can't have paint shops and auto body repair where there might be chemicals of that nature. As you get out into the C zone, you get less restrictive, and you enter into the sort of the north end or the bottom end of the Kentville Business Park, in the area where Kentville Chrysler is, and the Andritz and Weevex area. That area, there are some non-conforming businesses in that area now that were there before we developed the wellfield protection plan and zones, and they are permitted to stay, but there would be wouldn't be the permission for those type of businesses to occupy any other industrial lands in that C zone. The D zone, farthest away, the least risk, the longest travel time, the most opportunity to do a cleanup if there was some sort of a chemical or hydrocarbon spill. Reach out to where we expanded the park 8 or 9 years ago, up at the south end of Chipman, up where Valley Waste is. They're permitted to be there as a transfer station in the D zone. Scotia Recycling and the chicken hatchery. But in general, you know, other than leaving land raw or treed, residential is the least risk to our well field protection. You know, there's less, and even more so in a multi-unit, perhaps than single family. As you get into multi-units, there's most buildings today are either heated and cooled by electricity or geothermal. Fuel oil is become pretty much a thing of the past in most residential areas, even driving electric cars and rechargeable mowers and trimmers and chainsaws and all that sort of thing. A lot of people don't even have a jerry can of gas anymore. Those quantities are not a big risk anyway. It's the larger quantities that we're concerned about that can exist in a business park, because we still have, even though we're limited, business park or industrial park, businesses can have X number of liters, I don't have the number in front of me, of fuel oil or used oil, that sort of thing in on their premises. They have to meet that, not exceed that maximum, and remove used oil if they're a car dealership, that sort of thing, in a timely manner. But residential is always the least risk from any developed land to the well field.
And then certainly, there certainly is more land that if we so chose, we could designate it in industrial if
There's
need
land,
be
yeah, there's
at a later
land,
date.
certainly land south of the Hilts Road, even part of this subject property that's not up for rezone request, but that Andritz piece that Bryson has purchased, that piece I see is ideal for commercials, you know, highway commercial, C2 or industrial. Many of the parcels along the south side of the Hilts Road seem to be a natural divide. We'll maybe know better, have better recommendations when we get our secondary plan completed, but that certainly would be the farthest away and the better location for light industrial or commercial use along that south side of the Hilts Road, almost the entire length of that 3-kilometer Hilts Road.
Okay. And certainly, while I appreciate that we're not issuing site plan approvals, we're not talking about, we're simply just talking about rezoning, and do we want this land to be residential as opposed to industrial? I think one of the things, and I'll just sort of spin it off you, is when I read the request for proposal that went out with regards to the stormwater management plan, the master plan that will be done over the ensuing months, it talked about the comprehensive stormwater management plan, present and future, adhering to the climate conditions today, and needing that for strategic planning for the sustainable and development and resilience against the severe weather. So I think it's important for citizens to know that will be forthcoming, and that same practice will follow with regards to any new development that's done. And to Councillor Gerard's point with regards to the hydrological, it sounds from Caroline that if we choose to incorporate that after first reading, second reading, there are changes that we can, this is fluid, and we can make those as time goes along. You're wincing.
No, it's fluid. No pun intended, but yes, it's fluid. Certainly that's, you know, the stormwater master plan that it's in our regular Monday CAC report that it has been, you know, we have selected a consultant and are, you know, moving forward with that. That's going to be a multi-month process with public consultation and council presentations and take several months to get to that finished product. We'll be well into the 25 calendar year before we see that final plan. Okay. They're going to look at mostly existing issues and problems. I mean, not to say that there won't be recommendations for undeveloped land, but those are going to be handled as they're developed. You know, the problems that have happened, you know, over these even these last 10 years with rain events, those are the ones that are going to be focused on in the study, from one, you know, north to south, east to west of all the town limits, with mostly existing infrastructure is certainly the starting point. Okay, thank you. And my last one, sorry, Mayor, would probably be for you as the chair. So
as we are going through first and second reading, and we can implement and make changes to our MPS, whether we choose development agreements or site plan, that, again, to my last vernacular that I use, it's fluid. We can make those changes as we go along, correct?
That's correct, and.
No, okay, I'm sorry.
Well, I think part of it.
I'm generalizing. Please do. Keep that in mind.
Okay, I just want to, sorry, I apologize. I don't want to interrupt, but just to make sure we're clear, for this particular application and these amendments, once you recommend it to council for first reading, any significant changes made by council to the documents will have to come back to the advisory committee and go back through public participation program, just so you're aware. So if there's significant changes you would like to see to these amendments at this time, I would do it before you move it to council. However, you're always, as a council, you're always welcome to make changes to your planning documents, and you can direct staff to do that. So if you wanted to look at industrial stormwater management flow, that could be a recommendation at the council level from a planning or engineering perspective, or both. And then staff could do that and work through that process.
Okay, and I think that's probably why you were saying yes.
Yes,
That's
yes.
more what I'm thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay.
I didn't want to get to the next level
Yeah,
and then
no,
find out you want
that's
to.
fine. Yeah, okay. I'm
So,
good,
so
thank you.
this is this moment in time.
Sure, of course.
And now that we have a director of planning and we have new staff coming on, they will be taking on the mantle of modifying and amending these documents as required to meet the necessary changes. And one of the things that we've talked about, and why am I doing that? I believe is with regards to a secondary plan, so we can see those changes ongoing. And I think that's one of the things that we have to realize is that both our MPS and our LUB are dynamic documents, and they need to change and adapt with the times. You know, the rules say we're supposed to change them, or we're supposed to review them every 5 years, and we know well that we are behind the curve on that one. So it's one of those jobs for our new director of planning. Not that we're scaring them off or anything. Councillor Gerard, I see your name. However, Councillor Huntley has not spoken yet. So, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this comment and question will go to Director Bell. One thing I want to ask about is the site plan, just to kind of clear my head on it. And in a lot of the conversations that have come up about this development, you know, fear has been a factor of water. And it's been on the plate for a long time. So I'm going back to a site plan, and I know it's just it's a graphic representation of all the existing, you know, proposed improvements to a site. But in some way, I envision it like a puzzle. So what I'm wondering is, let's say I would like to know how many visits would, I'll pick you for example, that would go up and take a tour of, say, the corner A of where they're working now. And, you know, you'd have a checklist and go, these are 3 things I'm looking for. Is there something done like that that you can kind of, I'm trying to find some way to educate the public on and release a little bit of the fear on, you know, the work is being done. We're looking at everything that's updated. I don't know. I'm looking for some other piece of the puzzle, I guess, to fit into the site plan.
Right. You know, prior to any work happening, other than, you know, there I guess have been some clearings done, but, you know, to build roads, to put in infrastructure, to put in water, sewer, storm, curving, paving, the stormwater management aspect of a development, you have inspections done less by the town. We take over the roads and the sewer and the storm and all that infrastructure. When the designer has to, they design the project, they are there to inspect pipe going in the ground. We would, you know, I guess our team is building. We do have a project engineer here now, and myself and our public works team. We don't, on a new construction, we wouldn't be making, you know, frequent visits during construction. We would be there, you know, if issues come up, or, you know, we would see a little bit different than if we were building or rebuilding McDonald Avenue, which we did under a capital improvement over the last 3 years. We're there, because it's existing infrastructure, you got existing homes and lots of problems that come up during construction. New construction's a little different from the town's perspective. Yes, we do, we are taking it over at the end, so it is our interest from the get-go to make sure that it's built to our standards, but it also has to be signed off by, the designers of the project. They're the ones that have to provide the record drawings and the inspection reports, all the testing that has to happen on various stages, from whether that's pipe testing, the things that you don't see that are underground and buried that you only see it while they're happening, laying pipe, laying water mains, sewer, storm lines, building retention ponds or stormwater management areas. They're typically exposed, although there could be underground versions of the same that you may or may not see, but for the most part, those are ours that we have to maintain, and they become town property at the end of the development. Once we are satisfied that they've been built to municipal, provincial, and town standards. So I hope that answers kind of what you're asking. But
and of course, sorry, Dave, the last piece on that is there a way to update the public on how this project is going? Would it be just an update at CAC, or how often do you see it?
I mean, once it, assuming it goes through rezone and becomes an active construction site.
Yes.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of ways today with our own webpage and social medias, but certainly, absolutely at regular council meetings or CAC meetings, that could be provided to both the council that sits around the horseshoe and the general public, for sure.
Okay, because I think the more communication to the
Absolutely.
public really knocks down the fear of what's happening. Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. Don't go away, Dave. Director Bell, sorry. So you had mentioned in responding to Councillor Maxwell, net zero. How long has net zero in development for stormwater been a thing?
Not as long as we think, not as long as, it's been talked about for decades. Yes, it has. I've heard that, and less enforced. And it really has been, and not because of Kentville and issues that we've had. It's certainly the intensities have changed, and especially when subdivisions are upstream of existing subdivisions, you may see. Less in this case, because this one is, other than, has to cross Park Street infrastructure and ultimately get into the receiving water of the Cornwallis River. It's not impacting an existing older subdivision that was built in the 60s or earlier, that, probably has pipes that are sized for, and storm sewer, as I mentioned to you before, storm sewer in subdivisions is sized for a 1 in 5 year storm. That's storm sewer. Culverts are sized for 1 in 100. Culverts are road crossings. Stormwater management ponds in areas that are sized for 1 in 100. But storm sewer, the street is part of a storm sewer system. And much as we don't like to, see water on a road, but storm sewer, which you see under the curb of an older road like Palmer or Grant or any of the ones as you go up through. I'm using Palmer subdivision, but Palmer, Duncan, and even the older phases of McDougall Heights. That storm sewer is sized for the 1 in 5 year storm, which you get 20% of the time, a 1 in 5 chance essentially. So you get those rain events multiple times a year. Events that are bigger than that, a 1 in 10, higher value commercial properties or downtown, the storm sewers that are under the sidewalk or under the edge of the curb in downtown are sized typically for a 1 in 10 year storm. The downtown is, somewhat less prone to that. It's a flatter grade, and the pipes have a simpler access to the discharge to the river. I mean, many of even our sanitary sewer back in before we had a sewage treatment plant in New Minas, we had combined sewers in the downtown area, and they're still in the ground, although we've taken the storm water out of them for the most part. So we now have oversized sanitary sewer pipes in the downtown, which is not a bad thing. It helps with power outages and storage when the county's big pumping stations are down for a time, so we can allow things to back up around the square. Storm sewer, again, it's part, the street is part of the storm sewer system, and as much as we don't want to see it running down the gutter, that's what happens on a large rain event. Go ahead.
No, I'm trying to, how do we fit 2024, 1 in 100 year, or to design points,
Or whoever.
study on Condon, 1 in 200 year storm?
Yeah.
How do we fit that
Yeah,
to?
so that is not considered a storm sewer. That is
1 in
considered.
5.
That is considered a water course or a ravine that has water influence, not a storm sewer system that you would see in a subdivision under the curb and gutter. That type of sized pipe is sized for no less than 1 in 100. And that again, now you size the pipe downstream for no less than 1 in 100 for large events, but you also have to start considering upstream retention areas, whether that's upstream of Condon, in and around the Hilts area. That's still a part of that system that we're probably getting a little off of this rezone topic, but that's there's and no different than this site. Again, it's a concept plan, and until there's a more defined plan of where the roads are going to go and what the densities are and what the size and shape and the number of buildings are going to be there, that will determine the size of the pipes and the number and size of the stormwater management ponds in a development like this, or an existing flowage like the Condon system.
So is it an issue to marry the 2024, the big oversized stuff, to the 1980? And that, I mean, that's, and I'll give you an example. And 2019, Condon Avenue flooded for the whatever time.
Yeah.
The previous, the CAO comes and goes, this, I don't even think you were here, Dave, and says, this is what the fix for Condon Avenue. So, because I have ties to Condon Avenue, my question to the CAO at the time was, is this going to fix the problem? And the answer was yes. So I guess number one, how do we marry 1980, 1960 infrastructure to 2024 infrastructure? And an even more important question, because I talked to the residents of Palmer and McDougall Heights and the people that have water issues, where does the buck stop? So we have the designers, and I don't like the fact that when they call town hall and say, for 20 years I've lived here, I've never had water in my basement, now I do. Something happened. Somebody in town hall stamped a permit however long ago to say.
Counselor, you're digressing very far from the rezoning. You're now talking about old infrastructure. If you could bring your question back to how do we design for 2024? Because there
But
is.
it's all part and parcel of.
You're right, it is all
Where
part
does
and
the buck
parcel,
stop?
but it is not germane to why we're here today, and that's to talk about a rezoning. And this will be designed to 2024, and I think what you're trying to ask is, how do we keep their feet to the fire that they have done what they said they were going to do, and that it's going to do what they say it's going to do? Councillor?
Yeah, I want to know, I want to know, because of the past, how when we say yes to a rezoning, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, another council's not going to be sitting here going, these folks are having water issues, and they're being told it's your neighbor's fault or whatever. That's what I want to ensure. And I know we're way off topic on this, but to me and to a lot of people in town, this is very important.
Yeah. When we're talking about this development, we're talking something that is going to be built from the ground up, because the only infrastructure they really have to get into is the crossing of Park Street, and they have to either upgrade that that crossing. There is, there's already a end-of-life culvert there at Mitchell Brook now where it crosses Park Street. We know that it's in our 5-year plan to replace that. It's gonna have to be a large box culvert that will mean, probably rerouting or lowering or raising water lines and sewer lines, and that's on us because there's a river there, there's a brook there, Mitchell Brook. They can't contribute any more to that brook, intensity than what is going there today. And that's in the form of stormwater management areas and properly sized pipes that will go in that development. New developments are the ones that, new ones that really don't tag on the tail end of other ones that have been built for decades, are much easier for the designers and everyone involved to design properly and maintain from the get-go. Once it crosses Park Street, it enters the sort of the headwaters of the Cornwallis River, and the influence on properties is little to none.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or discussion on this matter?
Madam Chair, may I just address?
Sure.
Just from a planning perspective, I thought it might help to answer Councillor Huntley's question for the public to understand how site plans are enforceable. So the Municipal Government Act gives authority to inspect compliance through notice to the development officer, who is the one who approves their site plan approval. So what happens is typically they're complaint-based. However, some councils will set a standard inspection time period for their development officers, but if a complaint came in from a neighboring property that a new development was going in or had gone in and they were experiencing issues that were related to the site plan criteria, then the development officer would serve notice, go to the property, inspect, and if they felt that there was an issue that they weren't complying with the site plan approval requirements, then they can actually go to the Supreme Court and have an order put in place to either remedy, remove, or build whatever is necessary to fix the situation. And how it works is council has the authority to actually take that action and put the cost of taking the action on that property's taxes. So that's what happens. It's a long process and it is hard to enforce, but typically once you start, the developer is usually very compliant to get it done quickly. From an application notice of application, once site plan has been approved, it is public knowledge. So the neighbors are welcome to contact the development office and have access to any part of that approved application at any point.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, that clarification. So if there's nothing further, are you ready for the question? The question is on adoption of the motion to recommend first reading to council to approve the application to change the future designation of PID 5551774 from industrial to residential zoning at the September 9th special meeting of council. Further, to rezone the area marked Phase 1 on the map of the planner's report to a mixture of R3 and R4, and the Phase 2 remainder to high-density R5 residential. And further, to amend the MPS and make the necessary policy changes as outlined in both the planner's report and the additional recommendations from the public participation meeting document labeled additional recommendations. And further, schedule a public hearing on September 25th, 2024. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed, and the motion is carried. Thank you. All right, Council, our next matter of business is the COGS development. And Carolyn, was there anything that you wanted to add before we go on? Oh, Jillian, did I miss you?
No, that's okay. It's about the clocks.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll turn it off.
So I just want to clarify because there was some misunderstanding when it came around to how much density is permitted within the medium density R3 zone during the public meeting. And unfortunately, my answer for you is not clear. We've received a few different opinions, and it is unclear if the density cap applies to each lot or the building in the R3 zone. And because the policies are so ambiguous, establishing a maximum density without a design is very, very, very difficult. So I just want council to know that right now, where we're looking at the R3 zone, at an R3 zone property. And it is within council's ability to make changes to their R3 zone, as we've discussed, if you'd like to see changes to make it clear and provide direction on how you would like density to be handled within the medium density R3 zone, that is an option for you. So I just want to provide that as clarity because there's been mixed messaging. And I realize that that's not actually clarity, but it's the best answer I have at the moment.
All right, thank you very much for that, Caroline. We truly appreciate your work on this matter. Councillor York?
Yeah, I was actually going to recommend that perhaps we lay this on the table until we can get that clarification, but maybe we need to do that. Maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but.
No, I would say based on what Caroline has told us, that we do have this ambiguity that's floating over us. And so.
So I would recommend that we lay on the table the approval of, I have the pen, hold on.
I can do that.
You can fill that in?
Yeah, I will. So if that's the recommendation, then I would take that CAC lay on the table approval of the application to rezone PID 552666134 from medium density residential R3 to high density residential R4 zoning until staff can clarify the number of units permitted on an R3 lot. Does that meet what?
Yeah, yours was more succinct, so we'll go with yours.
All right. Are you willing to move that, Councillor York?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And do we have a seconder to lay on the table? For, not that they lay on the table, but that we lay the motion on the table. Councillor Huntley, thank you. So it has been moved and seconded that CAC lay on the table approval of the application to rezone PID 552666134 from medium density residential R3 to high density residential R4 zoning until staff can clarify the number of units permitted on an R3 lot. And this is a motion that has no discussion to it. However, what it does mean is that we ask staff if they have the capacity to bring this back to us, and when staff brings that back, it will come back to the table as if it never left the table. CAO?
Yes, I believe we do have the capacity.
All right. So council, are you ready for the question? The question is on adoption of the motion to lay on the table approval of the application to rezone PID 552666134 from medium density residential R3 to high density residential R4 zoning until staff can clarify the number of units permitted on an R3 lot. That's the question, yes. Yes?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how long it would take staff to come back with an answer to that question.
CAO?
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the challenges with multiple interpretations is it puts a consultant development officer in a very difficult position. So we will be bringing a recommendation for a 6-month term for a development officer to the next meeting of council. And I would feel more confident working with that development officer who will be in-house to make an interpretation as to where density settles to bring back to council. It just provides more consistency in how we've applied, and if that answers your question.
It won't be Monday.
No, but will it be before an election?
It would be, I will make every effort to have it back before there is an election. That's the best I can commit to. I'm not a development officer, nor do I have that skill set. I do believe it puts an awful lot of onus on a consultant development officer to ask them to make that determination. When we have one past practice that we followed, they have a different viewpoint, and we went for a third party to make an interpretation, and that interpretation was different. So if you're asking for us to bring forward a number before we have that DO filled with an in-house position, I think that would be very difficult, but the intention would be to bring it back before the election.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gerard?
And I apologize because I know you don't want discussion or questions, but when this does happen, would that person also bring, and I know we can't change anything in the MPS or LUB, but something that would bring more clarity instead of, because if that person changes and something comes to council again, then, you know, we're sitting there going, this is how it was interpreted, but so-and-so thinks that it's so.
So in my municipal skill set, planning is the weakest skill set that I have. Let me just be clear on that. I've never said anything different. The development officer and the director may look at what we have and say, you know what, it is too ambiguous. We need to bring forward changes to our planning documents before we can even make a recommendation. I don't know where that's going to fall, but the decision is the development officer. It's not even the director of planning's decision to make. And because if I'm speaking incorrectly, we have two planners that can correct me.
Yeah, I've had a chance to review it myself, so, and been part of the process that has had 3 or 4 different opinions on it to date. There's been what's happened through precedent over the years with this particular policy language, and I would think that we'd want to tighten it up going forward. The development officer will work with what we have currently, and we'll make a decision based on that, and we'll go from there, but I think there's some room for improvements in it.
Thank you. All right, are you ready for the question? The question is on adoption of the motion to lay on the table approval of the application to rezone PID 552-66134 from medium density R3 to high density residential R4 zoning until staff can clarify the number of units permitted on an R3 lot. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed. And the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Council, you were provided with minutes to our public participation meeting, both on August 29th and September 3rd. So for the record, if we could have approval of those 2 sets of minutes. Councillor York, thank you. And Deputy Mayor, thank you. And the reason I'm putting this to motion is because in past, we never had such a fulsome report from our development officer or our planner, and this time we had a very fulsome report. So these minutes will just kind of go with that set. So if there are no changes to either sets of minutes, the question is on approval of the minutes, and all those in favor? Those opposed? And those minutes are approved. Thank you very much. We have completed our agenda, and the time is 5:11. So we do not require a motion to adjourn this special meeting, but the meeting is adjourned. Nope. Oh, sorry. Yep, I didn't see that. No, this was a CAC with one specific purpose. And thank you, everybody, for